you can not like a lot about a guy. In fact, a lot of people who didn't like that Zoran Mamdani is a democratic socialist. They didn't like that Trump's a billionaire and has all sorts of things. But if you're actually going to make my life cheaper, I might be with you.
So the question is, like, when you think about Zoran, I didn't know. I mean, actually, that's not true. I knew a lot of people who voted for Zoran, but in my neighborhood, there weren't that many people who voted for Zoran because of Israel, really because of Israel. But whatever, I thought that was pretty insane. But the point is, he was speaking to people in a way that got them very excited. That was a populist way of talking about your life is not working, I'm going to make it work. And I think it's very clear to me that Plattner is able to channel that too. Does that mean he wins? I have no idea. But I don't think the calculus that gets him to winning is the same calculus that gets like a Chris Murphy to winning.
Yeah. Israel question's interesting in the upcoming primary in 2 weeks in New York. In my district, it's kind of interesting. Overwhelmingly, the candidates are Jewish. A lot of the town hall meetings are held at synagogues. And I will say they are hearty and substantive discussions, the sort of which that you would hope occur in a democracy. More increasingly I would say overwhelmingly between Jewish voters. And they're actually pretty respectful, pretty good conversations. When you get to southern Manhattan, you've got Brad Lander, who is challenging Dan Goldman. They're a little less. I mean, Dan Goldman's accusing Brad Lander of being a bad Jew, and like there's all sorts of stuff going on up there. But in my district, where Jack Schlossberg and half of the free world, around here, it's pretty high up the list of reasons why Democrats in 2 weeks are going to vote in their primary. The Israel question and where the candidates stand on it, and they're all a little bit different, right? Some say we should maintain all defensive and offensive weapon sales to Israel and sort of be linked at the hip with them. Others say we should have zero defensive and offensive weapons related to Israel. And then most people are somewhere in the middle. But I haven't seen an election in New York where that is as central to the discussion, not just amongst candidates, but amongst Jewish candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the New York 12 is and we both live in it. It's a very interesting district because it's very educated. It's very democratic, but not very liberal, which is an important distinction. So it is and there's quite a lot of money that could go for Democratic donations, which is also good. It's also really a district that shouldn't exist. Remember, historically, the West Side and the East Side, and as someone who grew up on the East Side, but parents grew up on the West Side. And you are West Side, I'm East Side. Like the difference, even though it seems like it's not a big difference, it's actually quite.
It's a gulf. It's a
cultural, in a very, it's a very provincial city, and it's a culturally a very.
You're
100%
difference. Right. New York's just a bunch of villages.
Right. And the West Side, and by the way, what we'll see in 2 weeks is that the West Side has many more people. It has these Democratic clubs, and winning the West Side. So the reason why I think ultimately probably Micah is going to win is because Micah has the Jerry Nadler vote, because Jerry endorsed him. And Micah has those New York West Side clubs, and there are these West Side Democratic clubs, and there are just more people on the West Side. I mean, we'll see what happens, but he's a West Side guy. Boris is an East Side guy, and Schlossberg is also East Side.
What do you think happens with Lander and Goldman? The polling is notoriously bad in primaries. The polling has Lander at double where Dan Goldman is. Dan Goldman is an established congressman. He was an impeachment lawyer. He was a lawyer for the impeachment. He's one of the wealthiest members of Congress, so raising money is not an issue. But if the polling is to be trusted, he's in trouble in his own district.
Yeah, I think, look, the difference is if Dan Goldman were running in New York 12, he'd probably win.
Right.
Because it's a much more...
in our district,
Yeah, our district, much more conservative, older people, wealthier people. But he's in this district that's like downtown Brooklyn, very groovy, much more lefty. And and then you have someone who is more lefty. And I think the Israel issue is a big issue there. Also, Dan, I think Dan would have been smarter if he had focused more on being an impeachment manager And on that, and saying, we're going to impeach Trump again, and like I did it the first time, so I have all this institutional knowledge, and I can do that, as opposed to making about Israel. And he's very involved in Israel, and I think that they have a real relationship with the country, which is perhaps not where their voters are.
It'll be interesting to watch. I mean, these are, we have exit polls, so that's where you can find out why somebody did what they did, and I'm going to find that very interesting on election night. We have a question from Bronwyn who says, was participation high? Talking about Maine, was participation high? Did Plattner get a lot of votes as compared to past Democratic primaries in Maine? It's a really good question, actually. I'm sorry, Kabir's not able to be here for it. It's very hard to compare. There are some places where voting is very consistent and the challenges are consistent. So when you're looking at Texas, we were looking at Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz in 2018. You can make that kind of comparison between Tallarico and Ken Paxton. Cruz was not nearly as flawed a candidate as Paxton is, but he was unpopular, and Beto O'Rourke ran a pretty flawless campaign, and he still lost by 3 points. We can't find adequate comparisons in Maine. It just doesn't work. So it's hard to know whether he got a lot of votes compared to past Democratic primaries in Maine. It's also an interesting thing because two people were running. Essentially, there were three candidates. There was a third candidate who got fewer votes. But the second person running, Janet Mills, who's the popular governor of the state, seemed to almost be a reluctant candidate.
Yeah.
Wasn't getting a lot, ran out of money, withdrew from the race, but withdrew too late to have her name pulled from the ballot. And when Graham Plattner got into trouble, reminded people sort of casually in interviews that she's still on the ballot, but there was no push, Molly. It wasn't like Chuck Schumer, who recruited her, and a whole bunch of Democrats went in and said, come on, we got a solution, rally around Janet Mills. I think if they had tried, it might have bitten back at them, because part of the problem with grassroots Democrats these days is they're not looking for lectures or selections from the Central Committee.
They're quite mad at leadership. And in fact, 30% of all Democrats are being primaried, which means that, what we're seeing with Dan Goldman is about Dan Goldman, but it's also not about Dan Goldman. It's also about this anger towards the leadership and towards the establishment. And part of what I saw, there's some interesting polling about Plattner that shows that some of the scandals actually make him more popular. That there's some, if it's put together in a way that is, again, who knows? We're months. I think the last guest was really smart about that. We're months and months away from this, and who even knows? But there is a sense that people don't like, and this worked for Trump too, and it worked for Mondami too, right? We saw rabbis coming out and, the fancy rabbi at fancy synagogues coming out saying you can't vote for him. And I think that actually really helped him. And so I do think this idea that the establishment is worried about a candidate, that a candidate might be too scary, plays very much into the idea of a populist, right?
Because and by the way, if you're Chuck Schumer, who's been under pressure for putting it, he's backing in some states candidates who are sort of not just not progressive, but not populist.
Yeah.
Graham Plattner might have been his moment to make an argument to say, maybe you should leave this to me. But he didn't make it. He didn't come out there. He didn't want to get involved. I'm sure they were all thinking about this, thinking, you know what, let this play out the way it plays out and see what happens next. I do want to take you over to California for a minute, where we advanced Steve Hilton. So it'll be Steve Hilton and Javier Becerra. Tom Steyer didn't quite make it. It was looking like he had a possibility, but last night we determined that he wasn't going to. But Steve Hilton sort of was starting to hint at some kind of a problem with the voting. You have friends in California. Every voter in California gets a book. It's not just a flyer like we get in New York. It's a book. And it tells you what all the many, many things are on the ballot. They make it very easy to vote. Everybody gets sent a ballot.
Yeah.
Everybody who's registered. And you can mail it in, you can put it in a ballot box, or you can take it in. Overwhelmingly, Democrats put it in ballot boxes or mail it in. That's all advance vote. Right. But it's intellectually a lift to be a voter in California. And it takes time to count. And that's the way it is. That's a feature. It's not a bug.
Yes.
Donald Trump has turned it into, you wait, and then overnight there's a dump of votes, and it goes the other way, and where those votes come from, and nobody knows where the votes come from. Why does this bullshit still work?
So I think that people don't understand math. And Spencer Platt, while he did have a bunch of AI videos, he had no ground game. He did not spend months and months campaigning. He had not run for other offices. He was not, a councilman. He had no relationships at all, except that he was on social media and very rich people liked him, which buoy for him, but that doesn't make you, it's a D plus 50. So it's like going to Alabama and saying like, why did the Democrat lose? It must be, fake
that must be fraud.
news. Right. And like and I think that it's just so stupid. And I think that look, the other thing, just to get back to this for 1 second, this guy, Spencer Pratt, his whole idea, he would say things like, Mayor Bass burned down my house, right? Mayor Bass didn't burn down your house, okay?
Right.
There were forest fires. They were terrible and tragic. She should have been there.
Yeah.
But that does not have anything to do with your house. This is something that happens. Maybe they could do better forest management, for sure. Maybe they should have a better emergency plan. Yes. Did Karen Bass burn down your house? Absolutely not.
Right.
And it was just, and the whole thing was so lazy. And he's
right. It is lazy.
Right. And I live in this trailer. No, he lives in the Bel Air Hotel. Bel Air Hotel, very nice hotel, but not a trailer.
Not a trailer.
There just was so, and the whole idea that he was going to run because his house had burned down and he was going to stop fires, with no anything, no idea how you stop fires, no idea, doesn't really believe in climate change. This is just lazy clickbait.
Right.
I have trouble imagining, even if you're very, very conservative, you really want to go for this.
The point is, there are people who have problems with how Karen Bass managed things there. And one of them ran against her as a Democrat and has now advanced to be in the runoff, Nitya Raman. And that's going to be a real battle to see, who do they vote for? They've got a reasonable progressive candidate, and they've got this very experienced woman in Karen Bass. But that's what a primary should be. It should be a fight between people who actually represent different ideas and present you with different options. Spencer Pratt wasn't introducing that into the mix fundamentally.
And by the way, she polls much better against Spencer Pratt than she does against this other candidate.
Absolutely. She's got a real fight on her hands now.
Right. Steve Hilton wanted Becerra. Becerra wanted Hilton.
Yes.
It's better for them to run against someone who's totally different than someone who's maybe a little bit different.
A little bit different. That's exactly right. I want to talk to you about, I think we had a question. Do we have a question that was about this? Yeah. What's your take? This is from Jokin Boken. What's your take on Mike Johnson and others' claims of election rigging in California and all the mail-in ballots? So let's just play what Donald Trump said about this yesterday, because he brought it up, which is why this has become such a big issue. Let's listen to what he had to say. This was on June 5th.
Rigged. It was a rigged election, just like they're rigging the election right now, it looks like in California. Can you imagine? It's 4 days, and they still aren't even close to telling you who won. You know why? Because they're rigging the election. That's why.
So this was June 5th. It was 4 days after the election. The election was rigged. He's starting about the 2020 election because that's why he put Bill Pulte in, who's going to be the head of the Department of National Intelligence. And he's going to be focused not on national intelligence threats, but in fact on the 2020 election, which is weird.
Yeah.
And then this. What do you do about this, Molly, where everybody, we on primary night in California, we all were talking about it. Rachel's from California. Lawrence was from California. They were explaining it's a system. When Eric Caldwell got pulled out of the race, people didn't exactly know what to do in that moment. They had to wait and look at other candidates and hold on to their ballots. They submitted them later than they otherwise would have, but still before the deadline. What do you do when somebody calls that rigged? What do you do when somebody calls the system working as it's supposed to work rigged? Because he does it over and over again, and the instinct of people like you and me is to ignore it because it's just stupid.
Can't ignore it.
But enough people hear it and they say, "Oh, they seem to have rigged the election in Illinois, in California."
Well, and I think it's important. We saw a Republican senator from the South saying, all these cities with these people of color, and they're rigging the vote. Yeah. What I think they mean is that they don't want people of color to vote.
Yeah.
And, that this is a sort of anti-Reconstruction, a certain kind of and again, when you think about DEI, right, this anti-racism, it's just racism, right? Anti-racism, just racism. And there's so much of this where we're just seeing them say the quiet part out loud, which is they don't want people of color to vote. They don't want women to vote. They don't, we see this, they want, you had Charlie Kirk and that crew, a lot of the male influencers talking about this idea that women shouldn't vote, that they should have one vote for family. This is where this is going. And I think, right? But this is where this is going.
I know, and you got to tell people because they wrote all this stuff down in Project 2025, and it was impossible to read. It was 922 pages. I broke down every chapter on TV.
You're the only person who ever read it.
And it's horrible. I'm sorry. Like that. I'm glad at least I could read it and save people from reading it. But they wrote all of this down. It was bad grammar. It wasn't well laid out. But they said all of these things, and they did them. And I constantly think that this might be a good strategy for the Dems. Write a 922-page, arcane, complicated, detail-oriented book with all of your policies, and then the person running for president should just deny it.
Yep.
And have nothing to do with it, and then it becomes a blueprint because they put in. 65% of Project 2025 has been implemented. I don't know, Molly, how much you feel that you're an economist, because we talk so much about the economy that I feel like you're sort of an honorary economist. So I would like you to evaluate. We have inflation. We have new numbers on inflation. It's up quite a bit, by the way. 4.1%, and it is no surprise. It's about gas prices and things that have inflated since this war with Iran. So Donald Trump was presented with the question about inflation. Let's listen to this.
I will. Are you concerned, Mr. President, about the latest inflation number which came out this morning? Could that be a
No, I love it.
for
The numbers look great. You know what I really love? I love the inflation. You know why? Because as soon as this war is over, I can say it now. Something you didn't know. Do you know we've been taking out millions of barrels of oil? Nobody knows it. You know who doesn't know about it? Iran, until right now.
What does that mean?
I have no idea what he's talking about. I have no idea. People ask me as an economic journalist, what does that mean? It's like, I don't know what that means. Like, I truly don't know what that means. He subsequently suggested that the good thing about inflation being high is it's because of the war, and when the war ends, it'll then be low. These are just... if I poke my eye with a needle, it'll be really bad. But then if I remove the needle from my eye, things are going to be great. Not really. I don't know what he means. I love that word he uses because he always puts he puts an article in front of everything. I love the inflation. It's always say he doesn't care about the war. He's lost control of the inflation topic. He just wants to bob and weave and talk about whatever else he wants to talk about, but not the things that are actually mattering to people.
The thing that I'm struck by when you watch him now, and this is something I've really seen over the last 6 months, is that he has a lot of trouble not saying things.
Yes.
Like, you'll see him sort of smile, and in his head, like when he called that journalist quiet piggy.
Yeah.
You'll see him in his head being like, this is what you don't say, and then just blurting it out.
Yeah.
And I do think, this is the difference between him at 75 and him at 79, is that he just doesn't have the kind of
you're a New Yorker.
Control.
You remember him from 20 and 30 years ago. He's always on the media. And he was actually pretty coherent. He could be on shows for an hour and there'd be humor and there'd be politics. I wouldn't have really generally shared some of his views on things. There were some pretty racist views in particular. Yeah. But he was cogent. Mm-hmm. He was a conversationalist. He in person, back in the day, I haven't been in person with him in some years now, but in person he was quite engaging. I would say bordering on charming. Yeah. You perhaps didn't want to be in business relationships with him, but that's not this Donald Trump that you're seeing now. This guy just doesn't seem to be sort of in control of the connection between what's in your brain and what comes out of your mouth.
Yeah, and it does seem like he has these moments where he sort of knows he's not supposed to do it, and then he can't prevent himself from doing it. And we see him say pretty crazy stuff. And I think lately it's been more and more unsettling. And it's so unsettling because the Republicans in the now there's this YOLO caucus, so maybe they do something. But people like Mike Johnson will just do anything Trump says. And that was what we were talking about when he said it was rigged. Just anything. Like it does. Mike Johnson seems to have no bar for if Trump says something, he is literally like he has found someone who will sign off on anything.
So, you've seen the Republicans a couple times vote with the Democrats on a couple of issues. But last night, South Carolina, a couple interesting things happened.
Yeah.
The Senate, the GOP Senate primary had Lindsey Graham, longtime senator, joined to the hip by Donald Trump. Like, he has not said a bad thing about Donald Trump since 2015, since he was running against him.
That's right.
Right, 2016. Yeah. I'm not even sure. I'm trying to remember what he said after January 6th, but it wasn't all that critical. He's just not all. I think he didn't get 60% of the vote in his primary. He was primaried from the right.
Yeah,
like he didn't do anything to piss Trump off, and that's what happened to him. Like, that was an interesting thing to watch. And then if you looked at the Democratic, the Republican primary for governor in that state, Ralph Norman and Nancy Mace, both members of Congress, resigned their seats not filling out their term to run for governor. They didn't even make the runoff.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, there is an anti-incumbent sentiment that is real.
Yes.
And it is
in both parties.
And it's hitting Trump, too. I mean, that is, Lindsey Graham is a company man. Yeah. And people feel like, there's one thing that Lindsey Graham is interested in, it's keeping his seat. And that we have seen again and again and again. And I think in a moment like this, when people want fighters and they feel, remember, Donald Trump said he was going to disrupt the system. He was going to make things cheaper. He was going to take Americans out of foreign wars. We're in foreign wars. Things are more expensive. And the system seems as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than it's ever been. And so the question is, who is the person who is the opposite of that? And that is not a Lindsey Graham.
No. A very interesting development there last night. Molly, always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, my friend.